Good Shabbos. This week's portion is Parshas Mishpatim, and Mishpatim is the beginning of the Torah's discussion in detail of laws. Until now, through Genesis, we're talking about the stories of the forefathers. The beginning of Shmos is mostly about the Exodus and the miracles that God performs for the Jews, and a few laws, a few halachas here and there. But now we get to what the Torah is really supposed to be about, because the word Torah really means the teaching of the laws. But then when you start reading it, the question becomes obvious. It starts with a discussion of slavery. It talks about an ox goring a cow. And the question that we would ask in our time, and probably they should have asked it if they did ask it many years before, is what is the relevance of these laws to us? These are laws written for an ancient society with different type of morals and ethics and codes and rules that we don't think of as appropriate for us, especially today in modern times. And I would have to say that the beauty of the Torah and the beauty of Talmudic Judaism or Rabbinic Judaism is their ability to codify laws in a way which tells us and make sure that we understand that the laws that the Torah gave us thousands of years ago are still the same laws that we follow today, yet they're able to update it, yet they're able to make it relevant. We're able to take an ox goring a cow and understand what laws should be in regard to damages when you get into a car accident. The laws of slavery, most of us would say, are totally immoral to have a slave at all. But what we could learn from it is how the Torah was advancing ideas in the society that it existed, that where it was promulgated. And what the Torah is doing is saying the way slaves were treated until now, the way you were treated as slaves in Egypt, that's not the way you should treat slaves. You have to treat slaves differently. You have to treat them as human beings. You have to understand that we have to be somewhat progressive. And we take that progressive attitude, that the spirit of the law, and we could then approach it to laws that we have today, and therefore we could say not to have slavery. Not that it's not technically allowed in the Torah, but it's not the spirit of the law. And therefore, the balancing act which is created in Rabbinic Judaism is the ability to make sure that these laws are still relevant, and yet they're updated, and yet it could be somewhat progressive. I was listening the other day to Stephen Breyer, who's retiring from the Supreme Court, and he made a comment quoting someone saying all men are created equal. And he said, of course, that means women also. But the truth is, it didn't mean that. When in the United States they said all men are created equal, they meant all men. They were really moving from a society which was ruled by a king and perhaps a certain amount of the aristocrats who ran a country, and they're saying no, all men, and I believe it was all landowners. Eventually, it's all men. Then it becomes all women, and then all of a sudden, the slaves, which were only counted in their senses of 3/5 of a human being, are now fully equal. And we could sit there and say we are going by the rule of law, which was stated hundreds of years ago in that case, even though they know fully well that they're not. They know that the rules about whether it's abortion, slavery, or any other issue has changed dramatically. Yet they understand that the spirit of the law, the spirit of what the fathers of the Constitution of the United States were trying to do, still applies to us, and we could update it and still say we're having fealty to the original intent of the law and even to the letter of the law, even though it sounds somewhat contradictory. And we do the same thing within the rules of halacha. Today we're now dealing with lab-grown meat. Is lab-grown meat kosher if it comes from a pig? Is it actually meat? Do we treat it as dairy? These are questions which are debated today, and they're all tied to the halacha that's stated in the Torah and then in the Talmud. Even though, of course, they didn't even dream of the idea of lab-grown meat. right? We deal with issues in infertility treatment and IVF. We talk about the time of death and brain death. These are all debated and hotly debated within rabbinic circles as to how to apply Torah law. They're taking the concepts, they're taking the spirit of the law, they're taking the notions that were presented in the Torah and in the Talmud, and trying to see how we can now make sure that it's relevant to us today and yet keeping with the law. This is the balancing act that we're all trying to do. And I think the Torah does it beautifully. So, very simply, what I'm trying to say is that the fact that we're talking about an ox goring a cow, and this is what, when students in yeshiva start learning Talmud, this is what they start off learning. Some of us would say, let's learn something more appropriate. Let's learn the laws of blessings, which are still exactly as they were hundreds or even thousands of years ago. But I think there's a certain beauty in making sure that a student understands the relevance and how we could approach the ox goring the cow and applying it to modern day society. Perhaps sometimes that's not done properly when teaching young students, but that's really the goal. The goal is to see the continuity and to see that there is not any break in the line of tradition in regard to halacha, even though morals change, even though facts change, even though our attitudes change, our mode of dress changes. Almost everything has changed from the way we acted and looked and approached life thousands of years ago, but yet we still see ourselves in following that tradition. So therefore, when we start reading Mishpatim, we have to keep our eyes open. We have to be able to look at it and see not just what's on the surface, but the depth, not just what the law is, but the spirit of the law, and make sure that when we approach the law, when we approach whether it's Shabbat, Kashrut, conversion, all kinds of laws, that we try to make sure that we understand the spirit and the letter of the law, try to merge the two, and to make sure that we can go into the future really very much still attached to the past. Good Shabbos.